Welcome to Owner Insights, the podcast that uncovers stories about businesses and their owners. I'm James Orchard, Managing Director of the Crew Harris Orchard. In each episode, I sit down with a business owner to hear their stories. We discuss things like why they started their business, what was their motivation, the mistakes they've made, the lessons they've learned, keys to growth, and what they do differently. These aren't how-to guides or do-as-I-say tips, just real conversations between two business people. Join us as we explore what it takes to become a truly great business. Trudy MacDonald, welcome to Owner Insights. Thanks for joining us this morning. And this is something quite different to all of the others recordings that we've done before, in that you are remote. So can I ask as a start, where are you?
I am in Lake Macquarie, which is near Newcastle, New South Wales.
Okay, so part of what we're going to talk about with your business is remote working, which is quite topical at the moment. Yes. But the other thing that differs in this particular conversation is that your business, TalentCode HR, is what you would call more a micro business. So a much smaller operation than we have discussed in the past, but no less great. So it'll be really good to talk to you about your business and the fact that it is small, why it's small, and how you've still been able to make an absolute success of it. So welcome. It's great to have you. Can you just start and give our listeners a little bit of context about your business, how big it is, how many people it's got, where they might be, and so on?
Absolutely, James. And thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So I founded TalentCode HR 13 years ago, and we currently have 6 core people, 6 permanent employees, and they are scattered all over the country, and I can now even say all over the world. Now, when I say the world, with the exception of Australia, and we're in many regional pockets, we've also got one of our key team members who's based in the Philippines, in Manila. $2.5 to $3 million turnover, and we work all over Australia. So previously, we've expanded our scope to work in parts of Asia and New Zealand, but these days, our target market is certainly just Australia.
And so what is it that you actually do? Just describe the core services of your business, because I'm also really interested to find out how it is that, being all over the place, you can actually focus and find customers.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So quick bit of background about myself, which might be useful to lead towards what we do today. So I've got a background in organizational psychology, and most of my career has been in or leading consulting businesses in the leadership space, in the high performance space. And I've had wonderful opportunities, particularly early in my career, to work in the United States doing startup businesses. I've been the CEO of 3 different organizations. So when I founded this business, TalentCode HR, I was very passionate about helping other leaders build high-performance workforces. So with a background in leadership and psychology, the space that we play in is people and performance. Now, that's a pretty broad area, and that's actually something that fuels my passion, because no day is the same. I will literally talk to 4 to 6 CEOs every single day. So I'm constantly jumping between different businesses, and that's what I love. But the services that we offer are at one end of the spectrum, supporting leaders and organizations with their more transactional HR needs. So a lot of that's around compliance with Fair Work Australia, making sure that they can manage grievances. So that's one part of my business. However, the main part of the business is what I refer to as consulting, and there's a few key buckets. The first is leadership development, and that's from team leaders through to boards, and I do a lot of work with boards and building high-performance board environments. We do a lot of space setting up, a lot of work setting up people practices and systems that strategically align to where organizations are going. So defining role clarity, making sure we've got good accountability systems, making sure our reward structures, whether that be salary reviews or incentives, are all strategically aligned and driving performance. And the third area is around culture. And I think this has been such an important area, particularly since COVID, when we look at the impact of hybrid and remote working arrangements, when we look at what it means to be leading different generations in the workforce, and a lot of the challenges leaders are having reintroducing accountability practices back into their business. So in summary, it's incredibly broad. And it's what I love about the business, because every organization is unique. And my team and I bring the expertise and the skill set to really partner with CEOs to help them go on that high performance journey.
So you're dealing with a lot of CEOs and boards.
Yes.
Most of those types of people think that, they've got leadership pretty much under control. I mean, look where they are.
Yeah.
But do you see common themes with dealing with these people of things that are problematic and similarly things that work really well?
Yeah, absolutely. And our target market is generally a medium-sized business.
So what would you call medium-sized?
Yeah, and I tend to think about number of employees rather than revenue. Excuse me. So, and anywhere from 30 to 200 employees would be the sweet spot for us. So what I typically find thematically is often the leader and certainly the leadership team have deep technical expertise, but they don't necessarily have the leadership expertise. And for a lot of these leaders and leadership teams, they recognize that what got them to where they are today isn't going to get them to the next level. And specifically, it's the leadership and the people practices that are holding them back. So that's one issue, and that's common.
So sorry to interrupt. How does you're talking SME land? So how do you get someone who's so technically capable to recognise that they're not actually that great at leading? And what does not great at leading actually look like? Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So what I find, James, is often the leaders are coming to us. So they will have an epiphany after listening to one of our speaking engagements. That, for example, they'll go, you know what? That's my problem. That's why I'm struggling to grow. That's why I've hit this ceiling and I can't get my business to the next stage. That's one driver. The second driver is they're actually quite self-aware. So they recognize that the people side of the business has become quite complex, and they actually need to be leading in a different way. Now, how do they know that? Often because they're either having issues with their people, or particularly CEOs that are looking to start to transition out of their business. So succession planning becomes a focus. They recognize that next person's not there. And that's having a personal impact on them.
So it could be as simple as, I'm the leader in this business, I'm the CEO, I'm saying things and they're not getting done because people aren't listening to me, or people whisper about me as I'm walking into the kitchen, and they don't like me, or so those types of specific things.
Not so much that people don't like me. And I actually find that most leaders in SMEs are loved by their teams. They're great people. What is usually missing is not the human side. It's the people practices and the systems that will actually enable them to scale.
Okay.
So often you get this mindset of a family business, and I say that without being derogatory, but everybody just gets in and does what they need to do. As you start to grow, there's a greater need for structure, for clarity, for KPIs, for accountability frameworks. And I think because so many of these leaders, their teams have been with them for so long, and they are so deeply loved and respected. Often they're not confident having what they refer to as tough conversations. So it's those accountability conversations, those difficult conversations that don't need to be difficult, by the way, and that's part of how we help them. But that's the perception. And subsequently, not everyone's rowing in the same direction, if I can use that analogy. And that's
we'll get to the rowing.
Yeah, we'll get to the rowing.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is really interesting. So I'm an SME. I've got 20 to 200 people working for me. I'm a really good bloke or, great girl, and everyone loves me. And that's the basis on which I've pretty much run the show all my life. But now things aren't quite working as well as I would like them to. I'm not exactly sure why, but my leadership has probably got something to do with it. How do you teach these leaders, these businesses, about having the difficult conversation and knowing when to have the difficult conversation and inserting accountability via those conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I'm all about scale, and I'm all about simplicity, and I'm all about being authentic. So the first thing is, often it doesn't need to be a difficult conversation. And this is where we elevate the conversation to talk about culture and ways of working. So how are things done within your organization? And one of the shifts, I think, that has happened probably only in the last 5 years, and this has been quite a global shift in terms of the way leaders are viewing and embracing accountability, is shifting away from this concept that accountability is one-on-one combat. And what I'm talking about here is somebody's not performing, so I've got to take them behind closed doors and have this difficult one-on-one conversation, and then they're going to be disengaged, and then they're going to go on sick leave, and they're going to tell everybody, and this snowball starts. Moving away from that to creating a culture of accountability. Now, what I mean by that is accountability is a team sport. We actually take the concept or the mindset that we are a team, and there's multiple teams within organizations. It might be the leadership team, it might be the functional team, it might be the whole organization, but we are a team. And if you can get really transparent with everybody around what's expected of them to be great, and then make sure everyone in the team knows what's expected of everyone else in the team to be great, so that we can be great as a team. And then we can create this wonderful environment whereby we can actually talk to each other about how we're tracking. So it's no longer a behind closed door conversation. It's, hey, here's how I'm going with what I need to deliver. And can I get your help? I've come up against this barrier, or I'm struggling with this. Can we talk about it? And knowing that there's no repercussions for asking for help. In fact, it's expected that you ask for help. And everybody leans in, and we brainstorm ideas, and then we work it out together. So that's the big cultural shift. And hopefully for your listeners hearing this, if you start to think about it, it's like, well, this isn't a difficult conversation anymore. Accountability just happens because you've got this sense of personal ownership. Each individual wants to be great, because accountability is not punishment. If we do it really well, it's actually really motivating. Everyone wants to be the winning team, right? So how do we create this sense of we are a winning team? Let's support each other so we can all lift together.
So it sounds like there's actually quite a bit of work that needs to be done to determine what accountability, what people's roles are, because typically what I see in these 20 to 200 people businesses is either job descriptions that are never looked at or used, or no job descriptions, and an assumption by pretty much everyone in the business about what they're supposed to do because they do it every day. So I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that you've actually got to go backwards, and you've got to start by clarifying what each role, what the expectations of each role are, what skills are required to do those roles, and then make sure that that's what's rolled out. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, James. So a little bit tongue in cheek, but tear up your job descriptions. In all seriousness, they're great for hiring people and creating some.
A lot of people will like to hear that.
Yeah, nobody ever looks at them, right? And if people are looking at them, it's usually for the wrong reason. It's for the reason to say, well, that's not on my job description and you're asking me to do it, so give me a pay rise. So that's the negative side. So I tend to advocate replacing it with something that I call a success profile. And it's a really simple one-page document that says, this is what it means to be successful in your job. These are the outcomes you need to deliver. How you get there, well, that's up to you. We're going to empower you to work that out. But these are the outcomes you need to deliver. And then the other side of the coin is, this is how you're going to show up. These are the behaviors that we expect of you. Because I think it's interesting, if you reflect on all the people you've worked with over your career, we all know people who are really great at what they do. So the outcomes are there.
Yeah.
But nobody likes them, right? And that's toxic for your culture. It will absolutely kill the team. That's not great. But I think we've also seen the reverse. There's always the great guy in the office that everybody loves. Intentions are good, alignment with values, but not great at delivering on the outcomes or inconsistent. And that's not great either. So I think to keep it really simple, it's worth understanding that for every role, there's two things we need from people. Number one is, what are the outcomes you need to deliver on? And there's usually no more than 5 per role. I mean, let's talk about the 80-20 rule. What are the things that really matter? And then how we're going to behave. And that's all about your culture and alignment to values. Both are really critical.
It's a really interesting conversation, particularly for businesses of this size. Can I just divert slightly, go back a few steps, and just talk about your professional background, but then how you got into these other startups, what they did, and how they went.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. If I go way back to when I finished high school, I had a wonderful opportunity to be an exchange student in Thailand. And I think that was, I think as you go through life, you don't always really know what's going to come, and it's about embracing opportunities, and things just happen. So I ended up in Thailand in a very small village that didn't speak English. So I had to learn to speak Thai. This was up on the border of Laos in North.
Interesting place to go for an exchange.
Yeah, well, I didn't choose it, but I was I was fortunate enough to win a scholarship. My dad worked at the Commonwealth Bank at the time, and they had chosen one employee to give their child a scholarship, and I put in the application, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And the only condition was I had to go somewhere in Asia. So I initially chose Japan because I thought, well, that's going to be much more beneficial for my career. But I was too old. They only wanted younger people. I was 18 at the time, so I just finished. Ancient history. That's right. So anyway, so I end up in this remote village, and things happen for a reason. But the thing that sparked my interest in psychology then, because I'd been accepted into university, but I deferred from occupational therapy. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. There was only 2 English books in the entire school library, and one of them was a psychology textbook. So I read it cover to cover because it's the only thing I could read, right, in that entire
wow.
So that sparked my interest in psychology, and hence I came back to Australia, enrolled in a science psychology degree, and even going through that, I wasn't quite sure that's what I wanted to do. It was all very clinical and mental health related, and I thought, you know what, I'm such an optimistic, driven person. I'm not sure that I could cope with this, and full credit to the professionals that do engage in that space. But there was one subject in my 4th year, which was called organizational psychology. And I remember sitting there going, yes, this is it. I finally found the thing I wanted to do. That got me into a master's in organizational psychology. And that was the start of that journey. But what happened from there is I'd grown up, always been incredibly busy. So I would do netball and ballet and Girl Guides and, you name it. I was out there occupied 7 days a week with activities. And I think that mindset and that way of operating just continued through my life. So I was putting myself out there while I was studying my master's, trying to get volunteer work, just trying to get experiences in the space. And I was fortunate because I came across this incredible woman who took me under her wing and basically put me into one of the big four banks with her. And from there, I think something just connected. I was ambitious. I was hardworking. She actually started a startup business, and she took me out of that big four environment with her. And I remember sitting in her basement, and that was the start of my real experience that I think shaped where I've got to today. In the basement, what are we going to call this company? What are the products? What are we going to do? And incredible experience. That business was sold after 18 months. Yeah. And I thought, wow, this is the world of startups. This is fast. It's furious.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I was working 60 hours a week easily. And I think even that's an interesting reflection if you think about those days. And I think many of your listeners will relate to that versus the work ethic today and how we engage today. Very, very different. It's hard to get people to work past 5 p.m. today, even professionals. So that led to then saying, well, that was successful. Let's do it again. You get on the adrenaline bus, I think, but let's go to the US. And in those days, psychometric assessments, which was one of the key spaces we were playing in, wasn't online. This is in the days before we'd gone digital. So we thought, if we're going to do this, let's go to the biggest market in the world. Let's go to the US. So 3 acquisitions in the US. I had the opportunity to go in and lead those acquisitions. So I was bouncing all over the US.
How old were you at this point?
I was 25. I was young. Yeah, crazy. Yeah. I just got married to my husband, my Australian husband. Yep. And so we moved to the US and, packed up our bags, and that was the start of the adventure. So three acquisitions in the US. I was leading all of them. And built this business underneath me. So I was right at the top of the organization.
So how many people were in these organizations? All up?
Yes. So when we left, when we sold that business and when I left to come home to Australia, I think we were about 150 people.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so quite big, but still SME type.
Still SME, but quite big, yeah. And having been there from day one, it was incredible. And the opportunities to work with some of America's biggest companies. So I think, James, I was just incredibly fortunate that I got thrown in the deep end at a very young age, well beyond my capacity. At age 25, I was being asked to manage 70-year-old individuals who owned businesses that we had acquired. I was so far out of my depth and made so many mistakes. But I think it's that mindset of just, constantly growing and learning and reflecting. So that enabled me to come back to Australia. I had my first child at that point in time. And that's when we came back to Newcastle. So that's where my husband's family is. So we needed family around us. I set up my own business at that time. So that was the first time I'd gone out on my own. And that was just a natural thing to do. I'd been in this startup world and it just made sense. I had the confidence, I had the contacts. I'd been operating in a very large pond in the US. Suddenly Australia felt very small. And
so that was 2013, was it? Or
that
thereabouts?
Was, yes, it was. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So can I just go back to 25-year-old running around the States, trying to control 70-year-olds who've probably been doing things the same way forever. You said that you felt out of your depth. How did you deal with that? Was it fake it till you make it, or do you think it was obvious that you felt out of your depth? Talk us through that.
Yeah. You know what? I some incredible learnings during that period. And if I can be very vulnerable right now, I think this is a story that I reflect on now. I was being rewarded for my characteristics that were getting results. And what I'm talking about there is incredibly driven, incredibly results focused, worked long hours, incredibly high standards for myself. And I would just push and push and push. At one stage, I was actually living with the CEO of the business while we were transitioning. And I remember we would work during dinner. We would work after dinner. We would work during breakfast. It was full on. It was fully consuming. And that behavior was being rewarded. In fact, I remember a comment from the leader at the time, which is, I've never known anyone who could get through the volume and the quality of the work that you do. And that just perpetuated it,
Wow.
right? So I kept doing more of that. However,
Yeah.
I had a moment one day which changed everything for me. And we had hired a new person into the team. It was when we were, just over 100 people. And I remember boldly walking up to her in the kitchen one day at work, and I put my hand out and I said, "Hey, hi, I'm Trudy. I just wanted to welcome you to the team." And she looked at me and she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You're the person who makes people cry."
Oh my God.
And I have never forgotten that, James. And I think that was one of those incredible learning moments when I realized that the person that I was looking up to, that I admired, that was role modeling what great leadership looked like to me, I realized that it didn't have enough dimensions. It was very singular. It was all about results and outcomes. It wasn't about people. And over the years, I've reflected on that and have realized I've needed to adapt my style. I've needed to be more humanistic. I've needed to be more empathetic. And I think for any leader, as we go through life and have those experiences, we learn that we need to be more rounded and we need to adapt. But that was one of those critical moments.
Why were you making people cry?
Incredibly results focused, just pushing and pushing and pushing, deadlines, outcomes. That's how I behaved. And I was
and these other
that
people, they couldn't hack it? What was it?
Yeah, I think so. I think I didn't have a filter for understanding human emotion and realizing that you can actually push people too far.
Yeah, right.
Now,
wow. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go on.
I was going to say fascinating because I reflect on the way leaders behave now and since COVID, and I think it's gone too far the other way. So a lot of the conversations I'm having now is we have become so empathetic and so humanistic, particularly since COVID, that we're not actually having those accountability conversations. So my default style is the other way: too much accountability, not enough empathy.
Yeah.
Most leaders have actually tipped the scales the other way.
Yeah. So might just come back to that in a minute, but before, you've just made me think of something else. You mentioned earlier that people don't want to work as hard.
Yeah.
And you also talked about how driven you were. Is there something innate in that drive, or is it environmental? So yeah, it's the fact that people don't want to work, is that because they're not driven, or is it environmental? And why were you so driven?
Yeah. Well, I think with the benefit of hindsight and what I know now, I do have more of an understanding around this. And I think there's two elements to it. And if I start with, let's call it personality, let's call it work style, let's think about it as thinking style, whatever you want to call it. We're all different. However, there's great tools out there that can help us understand different styles, and DISC is one of them. If your listeners have come across that, there's many others. But there's certain styles, and my style naturally, based on my personality, is I will prioritize and I will get motivated by having goals, challenging goals, working towards those goals, achieving those goals. And I get really bored if I'm not doing that. In fact, I'm not the best version of myself if I'm not working towards something with pressure. Now, for some of your listeners out there, they'll be thinking, well, that's not me. That doesn't motivate me. I'm the opposite of that. So they might be thinking, what really energizes me and what I prioritize is relationships and harmony and making sure that we're all on this journey together, and it's this sense of team. So that's just one example of a dichotomy, and there's some other dimensions to this as well, around whether you're big picture and more extroverted, or whether you're more detailed and introverted and planned and structured. So there's different styles, and I think that is a combination of personality. So that you've got the whole nature nurture debate there. What are you born with versus the environment? and some of your early experiences and your beliefs, that all contributes. However, we're all able to adapt. And I think that's something that I've learned over the years, that even though my natural style, if I'm not thinking about it or if I'm under pressure, is to be driven and results oriented and focus on outcomes, I can be humanistic and I can slow down and bring people on the journey. It just needs to be very deliberate. It can't be something that I naturally just fall into.
So I have to ask at this point, you've done these amazing things with startups. You've been to America. You've started your own business.
Yeah.
It would seem the sky is the limit for you, but there's only 5 or 6 people in your business.
Yes, that's a great question.
Why?
Okay. So let me paint the rest of the picture for you.
Or have you reached the sky but having 5 or 6 people is more than enough?
Yeah, James, it's a great question. So when I came back from the US, I set up my own business, and then I became incredibly successful very quickly. And I'm talking about, I secured the big 4 banks as clients within 6 months. So one of the local organizations in Sydney got wind of that because I was competing against them and said, hey, come on in, come and be our CEO.
Yeah.
And that was my first real CEO gig, where I was running a proper team. I'd come in from the outside, and I took that business to a whole other level very, very quickly.
Not making people cry anymore.
Not making people cry anymore. I'd learned a few things, but this is the insanity of what I was going through. So I was living in Newcastle at the time, Lake Macquarie. I'm working in Sydney. I was catching the train to and from work every day because you didn't work from home back in those days.
How far is that?
6 hours commuting a day.
You're kidding.
And I did that for 3 years.
Oh my God.
So to put it in context, why I now have a team of 6 people. So that business sold back to the US after I took it to another level. And I had a global non-compete at that point in time, which was very flattering, but very inconvenient. I had to move out of the industry. So for the first time, I went into a corporate role as the director of HR, and that was fashion retail. So that was a whole other experience for me. But what happened when I was leading that business is, now in hindsight, I recognize that I burnt out. Not surprising, commuting 6 hours a day. And let me add to that, I had a newborn and I had a 3-year-old.
So what time are you leaving home for the first 3 hours to get to work?
Yeah, I was on the 4:30 a.m. train every day.
Every day.
Every day. Now,
and how old's your child at this point?
I had a newborn, so I took 6 months maternity leave, and then I was back doing that.
Yeah.
And
so you're on the 4:30 train. So you're up at 3:45 to get ready.
Correct.
Catching the train at 4:30, getting to Sydney at 7:30, going to work, finishing work at 6, catching the train home. So you're home by 10.
I was catching a 4:30 train home, so I got myself out a little bit earlier.
Okay.
I was home by 7:30, 8 o'clock. Dinner with the family.
Then you got to go to bed.
Go to bed. Do it again. Do it again. Now, James, don't forget, I'd grown up doing I'm very focused on my health and my fitness. So I'm like, where do I fit exercise into this? So I used to get up, do a 40-minute yoga class in the CBD before I would go to work, just to get some kind of physical activity.
Yeah.
And then when I'd come home, I'd be doing workouts on the lounge room floor, stepping on Lego with kids everywhere, kids under my feet, trying to do some push-ups and things just to keep physically active as well. But I burnt out. I actually burnt out. And I didn't realize at the time, but I do now. Yeah. So short stint in retail, I got bored, frankly. I'd been so used to the pace, that showing up to the same company, to the same people, to the same issues every day just did my head in. So orchestrated a redundancy for myself out of that organization after 18 months. And that was a clear turning point, because I said, you know what, that's it. Setting up my own business. This is going to be mine. And here we go. And that was the start of TalentCode HR. But very deliberately at that point in time, I made a conscious decision where I said, this is not going to be a large team. And I want to create a business where people can fit work around their life, not fit life around their work. And I'd spent my entire life up until that point fitting life around my work.
Yeah.
And there's no regrets. And I've got an incredible husband who actually brought up our kids for us. He gave up his career so I could do all of this. And it does require a partnership.
Yeah.
But something has to give. So that was a very deliberate decision from the start of that business, that I'm going to work from home. I'm going to set up a remote team. I'm going to create this incredible work environment. We were just a little ahead of our time because COVID forced us all to do this. But I've been doing it for 13 years.
Fascinating. So are there compromises when you build your work around your life?
There are, and I think there's always compromise. So what are the things that compromise? If I think back for a moment back to when I was in the CEO role, commuting 6 hours a day, in all honesty, and it's hard for me to say this was the pecking order of my priorities in life. Number one, it was work. And it hurts me to say that because so many things got sacrificed because of that. And my children, who are now 19 and 21, will occasionally tell me, you were never around when we were kids. And that hurts, right? That really hurts. So work was the priority. The second priority was my kids. And I spent as much time with them as I could, and quality time. I was always very present. The third priority was my husband. Wanted to maintain a relationship with somebody that I loved dearly. The fourth priority was me. So I was trying to fit in some exercise and me time. And then extended family, which were pretty much dropping off, and friends weren't even in the equation. So something has to give. There's only so many hours in the day. And I think when I set up TalentCode HR, I said, you know what, I need to flip that completely. Life's short. I've spent my time and I've got the rewards of having had work as my priority, but that's not what life's about at the end of the day. So now what brings me joy, and the reason I don't want to grow this business to be any larger, is there's a few key priorities. One is I want to be doing purposeful, meaningful work that's making a difference to other organizations. And that's what gets me out of bed every day. Hearing a CEO go, Trudy, you've just changed this for me. You've changed my life. You've changed my business. That's what gets me out of bed. And the other thing I wanted to do is create meaningful careers and purposeful work for the people that work with me. And subsequently the flexibility to work from anywhere. And we can talk about this a bit if you like. It's me creating career paths for them in a very, very small business. And I've been able to do that successfully, which is good.
So going back to your advice to the CEOs and the board members, many of whom I'm guessing are trying to do what you were doing when you were the CEO, which is work long hours and prioritise work over things that are clearly more important in life. I mean, no one's going to go to your funeral and talk about what a great career you had, are they?
No, that's right.
How do you convince people who are, 55 years old and have always worked long hours and done all of those things? How do you convince them that there is a better way?
Yeah. I don't think a lot of convincing is required, to be honest. They just need to know that there's how to get there. I think that for most leaders, they now recognise that there is an opportunity to do things differently, and there's a deep, very authentic drive to do things differently, whether that be to start to scale down, to spend more time with family, with grandkids, whatever it is, or just engaging in personal interests. They often don't know how. And there's a few things that get in the way. One is they themselves are often their own worst enemy. And I've certainly lived through that, not being willing to let go, not getting out of the way yourself. And one of the biggest learnings I've had is if you've got the right people in your team, and I'm talking about smart, driven people whose goals are aligned with yours. If you've got the right people in your team, you've just got to get out of the way, because they're smarter than you. They bring something different to the table, and it's your team that will actually take the business to the next level. So it's having the confidence to take the risk, to say, you know what, I'm empowering you to make that decision. Is it always going to be the decision that I would make? No. Are you going to do it the way that I would do it? No. But I need to get really comfortable with that, recognizing that there will be so much incremental value.
But it sounds like you got to get the whole leadership group on that journey. I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of CEO board types, senior exec types, they don't want to do less work because they're worried they'll make less money. And the whole reason I'm going to work, and we're working, you know, mum and dad are both working and all of that, is so we can get more money to get more stuff. I mean, we're on this wheel, but that how do you overcome that concern?
Yeah, I think COVID changed people's mindsets around that. It's interesting though, because if you look back at the data around what motivates people in the workplace, and I'm not talking about leaders now, I'm talking about the general working population, money was usually ranked about number 5 in terms of the thing that was most important to you at work. It was all about purpose. It was all about development. It was all about culture and what it felt like with the people I worked with. And then money was down the list. Money's now number 1. It's been sitting there for about 4 years.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah,
it is. And I think what's driving that is cost of living, inflation, but people are actually genuinely really struggling. And then all those other factors come later. So, but however, if we go back to leaders, I think a lot of leaders have shifted their mindset around that. And you know, I certainly have over the years. I'm in a fortunate position where I've got enough money, but at some point you ask yourself, how much is enough? And for what end, for what means am I actually wanting more and more and more? Do I actually need it? And I think you start to ask the question, what's important to me in life? What brings me joy? How am I starting to give back to others, and creating something that's more sustainable?
One of the really interesting themes that's come through all of the conversations we've had on this podcast has been the absence of money as a motivator for growing businesses. It's always been about something else that's driven them. But it's also really interesting what you're saying now about motivation post-COVID and the impact of the cost of living, and how people are much more focused on money now than they have been. There's a couple of other really interesting things about you. One is your speaking. Now, I first met you at a speaking function, which I was really, really impressed with. So I forced myself to go and talk to you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into speaking, and can you also please tell me, how did you get so good at it?
Well, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. Oh dear.
Well, you know that. I mean, you've been given prizes and so forth.
Yeah, I don't. I'm very humble about it, though. I'm probably my own worst critic. How did I get into it? I think, well, the first thing is to recognise that I spent 10 years doing classical ballet. So in a leotard, on stage, in front of large audiences, after a while, you don't get a fear of being in front of people on stage. So I think I had that grounding. Now, that being said, I'm an introvert. So most people,
really?
Yeah, that's right. Most people would expect that, because when I do get on stage, James, I go into this mindset of I'm performing, just like when I was doing ballet. However, it exhausts me. It's really exhausting because it's stepping outside of my natural style. For people who know me personally, I'm very comfortable in small groups, one-on-one, in personal or family situations. I don't say much. I tend to sit back and listen. But you know, when you've got to perform, you've got to perform. So it's a different persona that I adopt. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is because I was in consulting from a very young age, as we've discussed, I quickly found myself in situations where I had to lead conversations, and then I was leading forums, and then I was facilitating, and then I was running development programs. So it became just a natural transition that the audience just got a little bit bigger as we went across. But I remember I was part of a CEO networking group when I was doing the Sydney CEO role and that terrible stage of commuting. And that particular group was helping me with my business, and that was part of the purpose of that group. And they recognized that if I could get out and start to do speaking engagements, it would be a way to demonstrate thought leadership, and that would build credibility, and that would be a good part of my business development strategy. And so I did a bit of a pilot run with my safe little CEO group and said, you know what, you're actually not bad at this. Why don't you see if you can talk to the whole network? And this was a nationwide network of CEOs. And I remember going into head office because I'd been referred in there, and they said, great, you've come highly recommended, Trudy, from your group. We need a speaker in the HR space. And specifically, we want you to talk about remuneration and pay and pay structures. And I remember sitting there in that moment going, I know about 1% of what I need to know. but I obviously put on my game face and I said, great, got it. They said, you've got 2 weeks and that's going to be your first gig. And I had 2 weeks to build my expertise and to become a thought leader in remuneration. And this is before the days of Chat GPT, right? It would have been so much easier these days. But I just backed myself, James. And I think that's this mindset and this drive that I've got. I just said, you know what? It's an opportunity. I'm going to embrace it. I've got 2 choices here. I run away from it and go, no, that's not my wheelhouse. Or I go, this is going to become my wheelhouse. Let's embrace the opportunity. And that year I won Speaker of the Year, which just blew me away. So that was
the adrenaline of the deadline and having to find out a whole lot of stuff actually probably helped you.
Absolutely. And that played to my style. That played to my personality. Not everybody would thrive in that environment, as you know.
Now, I'm assuming that because you've got a smaller business where you prioritise life, it has enabled you to get into your other passion, rowing.
Yes, absolutely.
So how often do you row, and what have you got coming up?
Yes. So I think interesting just to realise how I got there, because even though this business was to prioritise life, my speaking engagements had me flying all over the country very quickly. Pre-COVID, I was on a plane 4 days a week. So even though my intention was that work was going to fit around my life, the reality was it wasn't actually happening. I was spending a lot of time in hotel rooms and on aeroplanes. So back then I was still doing ballet. So I used to travel and I'd drop into the Australian Ballet, into Queensland Ballet, into Sydney Dance Company, and I'd be doing dance classes in between my travel.
Okay.
And that's
as your form of exercise.
Yes, that's right. And just well, I wouldn't say relaxation is very hard, but it was part of that. So when COVID hit, my son, who's my eldest, had been rowing all through school, and they had a parents learn to row day. So my husband and I got out in a quad, that's 4 people in a boat, with my son at one end and one of his female colleagues at the other end. And we got in the boat and I got out there and I thought, you know what, this is actually pretty cool, having watched rowing for years and years as a spectator. So when COVID hit, I didn't travel anymore, suddenly I had time, because rowing, for anyone who doesn't understand the sport, you need the water to be as flat as possible. So typically you get on the water at 5:30 or 6 a.m. in the morning. So I started and then I got hooked. So where am I today? I've been rowing since COVID. This is going to sound insane, but probably not unexpected given the story that you've heard so far. So this is my 4th year I've made the state team. So I just had state last weekend. I've got nationals in a week and a half representing New South Wales. And so I train, James, 6 days a week, twice a day. It's a little insane.
Right. Only 12 sessions a week.
Only 12 sessions a week,
For how long?
Generally an hour and a half each session.
Wow.
Yeah. So I never thought I'd be a morning person, but my entire life I've had to get up at silly hours in the morning.
No, that's fantastic. Can I just go back to your business and your 5 or 6 people for a minute? How do you manage people who are all over Australia?
Yeah, it's a great
question. How do you keep them productive? I think a lot of when you work from home, in inverted commas, quite often conjures up images of people sitting around bludging. And so a lot of people dismiss it for that reason. Clearly, that's sometimes the case, but often not the case.
Yeah.
How do you effectively run or have people working from home?
Yeah. So I think your comment there is an interesting one, and if I can just reflect on the bigger picture, when we first got forced into working from home post-COVID, the biggest concern CEOs and boards had were that people would be bludging, that they wouldn't be working. And I remember having conversations in boardrooms where there were things such as, do you think we could put a camera on their laptops at home so we can watch them to make sure they're actually sitting at their desk? And it's quite hilarious just to think about that now. But the biggest issue that's actually emerged in hindsight, now that a whole lot of research has come out around this, is it's not lack of productivity. It's actually lack of connection.
Yeah.
So it's the meaningful professional and personal relationships that have been diminished, and that leads to silos within organizations. We tend to be quite tight within our team, but we're not connected to the organization. And it also means that when there is interpersonal conflict or tension, it's heightened because we don't have those relationships to fall back on. So how do we overcome this? There's a few things. One is, and if I can put it into 2 categories, one is, what are your ways of working and your people practices, so that everyone knows what to expect and we're all on the same page in terms of how we work. The other side of it is the hearts. It's the human side, it's the connection. And you've got to prioritize both of those elements. So if I talk about the systems and the practices for a moment, within my team, we get together every quarter and we do a reset. And that reset is, what's the strategy of the business? What do we need to focus on as a team? And what are the implications for our roles as we go forward for the next 90 days? So we tend to work in 90-day sprints, even though we've got an overriding strategy. It keeps us nimble, it keeps us agile. Second thing is, everybody's crystal clear on what it means to be great in their role. And we have a dashboard, and it's listed up there. It's got, these are the things we need to deliver, and it's got people's names against them. It's got targets or goals. Sometimes it's a KPI, sometimes it's an activity, sometimes it's a goal they need to deliver on. Sometimes it's strategic priorities, sometimes it's just the day-to-day, but it's all up there on our dashboard. And what we do, we have this cadence, this operating rhythm that works for us. And it looks a bit like this. Every single day, we have a stand-up meeting, we call it, for 15 to 20 minutes. So we all get online, and there's 4 agenda items that we cover. Number one,
you're all standing up.
The intention is stand up because it only goes for 15 to 20 minutes. Now, the reality is,
so the stand up is about keeping it quick.
It's about keeping it quick. Don't get too relaxed in your chair, because this is a fast,
Got it.
So 4 agenda items. Number one is bit of good news or gratitude. So what's going on in my life? And, it might be, got to walk the dog this morning. That was fantastic. Or it might be, I'm really grateful for my health because my mum's really sick at the moment. So it's that moment of personal connection. So we feel valued, we feel connected. But it's also the opportunity to celebrate and say, good news, we just won this new client yesterday, or really grateful for the work that somebody did for me yesterday, blah, blah, blah. So
good news and gratitude, great.
Good news and gratitude. And all the research behind gratitude is, even if things are not good for you at home, it shifts your mindset. Start the day feeling appreciative. It's a reset on a daily basis. Next agenda item, which is really important, is what's my focus for today? And this is where we challenge everyone to elevate. So are we working on the most important things? We know what our goals are. We know what we need to deliver. What's the one thing I'm doing today that's contributing to those things that matter? And I think that's so incredibly powerful, because when I've debriefed with my team over the years to review the agenda, is this working? What they tell me in the context of that agenda item is I'm actually getting stuff done. And I think it's just this deliberate process at the start of the day to say, what's that big, hairy, ugly thing that I might be procrastinating on that I'm going to commit to do? And the fact that they think about it and then declare it to the team means that they actually do it.
Yeah, and as opposed to rolling up to the daily meeting and trotting out the same 5 things that were trotted out yesterday.
That's it. One thing, what am I committing to doing?
Yeah.
And the psychology behind this is fascinating, because for many of us, I think we get to the end of the day and we go, oh, gee, today was a busy day. Don't know what I did, but it was a busy day. We go home and we go, I did that one thing today, and that was impactful. It was purposeful. I feel good. I've got this real sense of accomplishment. So that's good. The next agenda item is, what do I need help with? That's incredibly powerful. I'm blocked on this. Can I get some ideas? Or I'm struggling with this. And then the last agenda item is any micro communication updates. And what it means is nobody ever feels as though I don't know what's going on. It's just those incremental little updates. This is where we're at. This is what's happening. This has changed. We need to think about this. Here's an idea. And that's it, 15 to 20 minutes every day.
So there's 5 people divided by 15 minutes. So everyone's got 3 minutes to say their 4 points. Okay. So, so you got to get on with it, and you got to be, and you need to prepare for the meeting.
That's it. But you get good at it, right? So the preparation is literally, here's my goals, and that's visible. So once a week, we replace that with a meeting where we actually look at our dashboard and we color code our progress. We traffic light it, red, yellow, green. And each individual is responsible for talking through, how am I tracking on my monthly goals, on my 90-day goals? And if anything's in the red or the yellow, the expectation is you explain why and you ask for help. And the expectation is the team lean in with ideas, with suggestions, and then you listen to that and you go, great, thanks for that. This is what I'm going to do. The baton comes back to that individual.
So have you ever had someone work for you who just wasn't up to it, couldn't do it? How'd you deal with it?
Many people, James. And this has been one of my learnings.
Phew.
It is not perfect. It is not perfect. Yeah. So what I've discovered over the years is the way that I am, and hence the way I run my business, is pretty unique. And I've had many, many failed hiring attempts. And the people who have failed to work in our business, and it's not that they're poor performing individuals in general, because they're very successful in other businesses. They haven't worked in our business because there is an incredibly fast pace of change. And what I'm talking about is, like I said, I will talk to 5 to 6 CEOs every day. I have to switch my head into different businesses, understand different challenges, and just be able to switch quickly. Most people can't deal with that. It's way too fast. People need time to reflect, to prepare, can't just jump from one to the other. However, in order for us to be profitable, that's the nature of consulting, right? It's very different to operating in an organization where you've got the luxury of time. Even though people think they're working at a fast pace, they don't know what fast pace looks like until they get here. The second thing is, in a small team, no one can hide. So if you're not leaning in and you don't have the mindset and the motivation to give everything when you're here, the rest of the team will actually let you know pretty quickly that you're not working. Yeah. So what has been successful for me, and this has been a key learning, is I've had incredible success hiring young, smart, driven individuals who have a huge capacity for learning, have the motivation to progress their careers. And I've had people that have been with me for 10 years and taken them from a graduate right through to very senior positions.
Yeah.
Because the benefit of a small business is there's no limit to the opportunities. There's no limit to the growth.
So, Trudy, one of the key themes that seems to be coming across is the need for the background work. And, gee, it was good to hear earlier when you talked about ripping up those job descriptions that never get looked at and take forever to write, and replacing them with the success profile. So can you just talk about the success profile a little bit more, so that listeners can possibly copy it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way to do this, it's actually a very structured, systematic approach. And it starts by asking yourself at a business level, what does great look like? So, James, there's actually a really structured and systemized way of approaching this. And it starts by asking yourself, what does success look like at the business level? And many of the listeners may have heard of the balanced scorecard. So you might have some financial measures of success, some operational measures, some people measures, and then some customer measures of success as well. So if you can start by defining those, then the next question is to look at different functions within your business and say, okay, how do they cascade down? So how do these functions contribute to delivering on the business goals? Once you've got it set up at a functional level, so what does the marketing team need to do, or what does our production team need to do to contribute? Then you can cascade it down to individuals who sit within that function. And I think that's so important because at an individual level, I need to know how what I'm doing and what I'm delivering on contributes to team success. And I also need to understand how my team contributes to the success of the business. So when you get to an individual level, and an analogy that I think is quite useful here is to think about big rocks. So I like to think about, if you can imagine, a bucket represents all the time that you have to do your job. Everyone chooses every day what to put into that bucket. So you can put sand in the bucket, which is all the busy work, the rework, the work that's not adding a lot of value. You can put gravel into the bucket, and these are usually more deliberate activities that might sit on your to-do list, urgent things predominantly. And then you can put rocks in the bucket. And I like to think about the rocks as the things that you would do, and if you did them well, you would be great in your job. And most roles have no more than 5 rocks. So if we can use this process of cascading outcomes through the organization down to individual roles so that each individual has 5 or less big rocks that they need to focus on, and we know how we're going to measure those rocks. So the question is, how do you know that you've done a good job delivering on those rocks? And how would I know as your manager that you've done a good job? That's the outcome measure that we're looking for. And if you can go through that process and you do it with your people, that's the key thing, because they need buy-in. You can't just tell them this is what you got to do. You got to help them understand the why, how it impacts how it relates to team success and then organizational success.
So you've got to agree what the rocks are.
You've got to agree what the rocks are. Yes.
Okay.
And that should naturally fall out of that cascade that I just spoke about.
So I can imagine just that process alone. If you've got 30 people in your business, there's going to be quite a bit of work involved, but you're going to get an outcome in your business which is much clearer around what they're required to do and therefore their accountability.
That's it, exactly. So if I can simplify it, if you wanted to get the foundations right in your business, there's 3 key steps. Number 1 is define what great looks like for every person in your business. Now, not good, great. So you want it to be aspirational. Step number 2 is make sure you are measuring what it means to be great. So this is now about those accountability practices and the transparency I spoke about. And then the 3rd step is make sure you're rewarding people for being great. Now, what that means is you're not going to reward people for being good. And I like to think about it as you pay people a fair base salary, and in exchange, you expect them to be good.
Yeah.
If you're going to pay them more than that, and whether that be an
Yeah.
incentive or give them pay rises, well, they need to be edging towards being great.
Yeah.
So those 3 steps, absolutely foundational. And then I would add to that an overlay where people need to feel psychologically safe in your organization. And what that means is that they can speak up, they can contribute, they can make mistakes without fear of repercussions, and they need to feel valued and appreciated. And if you can get those 2 elements right, that will get you 80% of the way towards building a high-performance business.
So scrap those job descriptions and get into working out what the rocks are and how to reward them and what great looks like in those roles. Fantastic. Well, Trudy, it's been a fascinating conversation. It's really been great to talk to the founder and managing director of a small business, which is clearly extremely successful, operates all over the place, doesn't have an office, and so in that regard is dare I say, a little bit unconventional, although these days not so much. But the conversation starting off with your visit to Thailand as an 18-year-old and then morphing into running around the States telling 70-year-olds what to do. It's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much for sharing with us. It's been really good, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, James. It's a real pleasure.